I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast, and in our series of discussions of music from the Pokemon movies, comparing the English and Japanese endings, we made it up to movie 10, The Rise of Darkrai.
Woohoo!
So, in this episode, we have a couple songs to discuss, of course. We also have a little bit of feedback to go over. But the matchup this time is I Will Be With You, Where the Lost Ones Go, performed by Sarah Brightman. And in the movie version, Chris Thompson, but there are several other versions of this song, which we'll talk about. On the English side, we have I'll Always Remember You by Kirsten Price. There are some other music, we'll talk about that, but that's going to be our primary matchup. So we're going to start by explaining what we know about the songs, and start on the Japanese side. That's kind of in quotes this time, but Anne, what can you tell me about Sarah Brightman, first of all?
Well, for starters, she was very easy to research. I didn't even have to break out my Denshiji show. But that is because she is not Japanese. She is a English singer, and a woman of many talents. In addition to being a classical trained soprano, she's also an actress, a songwriter, a dancer, musician. She's done a lot of things, and she began, her entertainment education since she was very young, taking dance and piano and performing in many local festivals and competitions, and just moving up until at age 13, she made her debut in the theatrical musical I and Albert at the Piccadilly Theatre in London, and just kept on having success after that. She began her television and music career with a group called Hot Gossip, and they were kind of a dancing, singing troupe that got to perform on a lot of television programs that were known for being very risque. They had some interesting outfits and even more interestingly titled songs. Some of them were so very obviously risque, but there's also some just weird ones. Like there's a disco track called I Lost My Heart to a Starship Trooper, so probably a very interesting time of her life. But she eventually auditioned for a new musical called Cats that people may have heard of, which is where she met Andrew Lloyd Webber and married Andrew Lloyd Webber and eventually divorced Andrew Lloyd Webber. But more importantly, she went on to create the character of Christine in Phantom of the Opera, another little show people may have heard of. And in fact, her recording, the original London cast recording, is the highest selling cast album to date. Her acting was not as well received in the US when the show moved to Broadway. Critics loved her singing, were not as fond of her acting, despite the fact that the show was kind of a smash success, as people know. So I guess your mileage may vary on whether that was deserved or whether it was sour grapes. There was a lot of political maneuvering to get her to be able to perform in America. The American Theatrical Actors Guild was not a big fan of that. But she did win some awards for her performance at places other than the Tonys. So again, I guess it comes down to viewer preference. Sometime after leaving the stage, she began working on her music career a bit more heavily, and she's credited with sort of creating the classical crossover genre, where she sings in a very high classical opera style, but also melds pop and all sorts of other genres together. And she herself doesn't like to put labels on music, but has finally accepted that genre, the classical crossover, whatever that means. It basically just seems to be a catch-all, but she's worked with a variety of different artists, from the vocalist of Kiss, as we'll talk about, to Josh Groban, classical artists such as Jose Carreras, and she's sung, as many classically trained singers do, in about every language under the sun, including but not limited to English, Spanish, Latin, French, Italian, Catalan, German, Turkish, Russian, Mandarin Chinese, and Japanese. And at one time, she was one of the highest selling foreign artists in Japan. She's gained recognition all over the world, but the Japanese fame is particularly notable because it probably led to her getting commissioned to work on this song for the Pokemon movie. And it was difficult for me to find properly verified and cited facts about this, but it does seem that most people state that she did not, well, obviously she did not develop Where the Lost Ones Go, as I'll talk about later, because it is a cover for the Pokemon movie, but it does sound like she was contacted specifically to work on, to provide a song for this movie, and that this song was specifically requested to be licensed. So while the song may not have been developed specifically for the movie, it does sound that the producers had a strong idea in getting her voice and this song in particular on the track. A couple fun, interesting facts about Sarah Brightman. She almost went into space and became the first opera singer to perform from space. She pulled out at the last minute due to family problems, but I just thought that was interesting. She's performed at 2 Olympic Games, Barcelona and Beijing. She's very well known for her philanthropy work and her charity work, and especially her work with UNESCO, and she's kind of an artist ambassador for that. And her vocal range, the height limit, she can hit an F6, which if you're not in the know, that's a big deal. And her highest note hit in public is an E6, which again is just a very big deal. And this is not the first Japanese film that she has been a part of. She's also recorded songs for a couple other live action and anime movies and a few indie video games. Absolutely
Massive amount of information worked there. Extremely impressive resume.
Because I could actually read the websites this time.
Yeah, that certainly helped. Probably like the biggest get in Pokemon music since like Donna Summer and The Power of One, so.
Yeah, she is definitely recognized internationally and rather a large star, and one of the highest selling musical artists, period, but like definitely in the world of classical music, she is the high selling female soprano ever.
Okay, well that's a lot about her. What can you tell me about the song? It's not an original song. It actually goes back a fair ways. What can you tell us about I Will Be With You, Where the Lost Ones Go?
Yeah, it is a cover of Where the Lost Ones Go, no parentheses, which was a single from a Norwegian singer called Cecil. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I did my best to look up a pronunciation guide, but found conflicting guides. But it's from her All Good Things album. It's a duet with Espen Lind. The lyrics and the melody are about the same. The Sarah Brightman version is a little different, a little more operatic. And she performs it with Chris Thompson for the movie and the single release. And she did record it with a different male vocalist, Paul Stanley of Kiss fame, for the album. She's also recorded a Polish edition and a Russian edition with different male vocalists as well. Let's see, the single released in 2007, July 16th. And like I said, all accounts seem to be that this song was requested specifically as well as Sarah Brightman. And at that time, she was very popular in Japan. So kind of suggests that there was a deliberate musical choice being made for this movie. And being that it is a movie about music, that would make sense. But being that it is a cover song, that's very unlikely that it was developed specifically for the movie.
Yeah, it seems more like one of those right place, right time things.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of reminds me of the journey that the We're a Miracle by Christina Aguilera may have taken. It just happened to come across the desks of the right people at the time that they were looking for a song to fit a certain vibe, and, you know, all the right people managed to meet each other to make this happen.
Yeah, those stories are always pretty interesting. Well, let's transition back over to the English side. So, I don't have quite as much information on Kirsten Price. I can't quite match that, I'll admit. But she was born in the United Kingdom, I think near London. We actually do have an interview with her that I did back way in 2008. kind of an interesting story there. It was going to be in person, but we changed it to over the phone, which ended up being good because there was a huge hailstorm that hit when she arrived in Milwaukee. But it's a great little interview, and it gives more detail than I'll be able to put in here. But in any case, she came to America in 2001, sometime around 9/11. I don't know if it was right before or right after or what. And she, sort of got into music, did a few things here or there. As far as her non-Pokemon work, you might be familiar with a song called Magic Tree, which was used in a couple places. It was used on Showtime's The L Word, and I think it was used in an episode of CSI, or one of the CSI shows back in the day. So definitely some publicity there. Around the time when this movie came out, she was sort of promoting her album called Guts and Garbage, which we talk about in the interview. A couple explicit tracks on there, but most of the rest of it is probably okayish. But in any case, she's also had some work, I guess, production-wise with Kids Bop, and since then she's written another album. I don't remember the exact name of it. But since then, she's done like one or two other things, and she's kind of fallen off the face of the earth as far as like music goes. 4 or 5 years ago, doesn't have an active website. Her Facebook seems to be inactive. Her YouTube channel seems to be inactive. So not really sure what she's up to right now. Hasn't done anything Pokemon since, except for, of course, the theme for the second Diamond and Pearl season, which we'll talk about a little bit later. However, one interesting thing we picked up from the interview there is that this was back when Pokemon USA, at the time, they weren't TPCI yet, still had an office in New York. They would eventually merge their operations into their Seattle area operations. But at this time, I believe they still had some folks working out in New York City. And they came in for the recording of the two songs that she did. And she said it was a lot of fun, so always a little bit of an interesting fact. As far as the actual writing of I'll Always Remember You, this is the new writing team that we have. John Leffler and David Wolford, whose names you will be hearing a lot over the next 5 or 6 episodes, I would say. And they collaborate on this as they did for much of the stuff in the 4th and 5th generations. So those are more or less the production details, not nearly as verbose as what Anne was able to provide, but I hope that filled in some things there. Any thoughts, Anne?
Well, I did not get a Sarah Brightman interview, so maybe it all comes out in the wash.
Perhaps. It was a lot of fun doing that one, so.
Now, this is a lovely song, and so I'm guessing with John Leffler and David Wolford on it, yeah, it probably was developed specifically for this movie or Pokemon in general, and
I have to assume.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about each of the songs sort of content-wise. First off, I Will Be With You. So, you mentioned that this is a cover. The original version has some definite similarities, but the instrumentation is different because it was an older version. How would you describe sort of the instrumentation genre of the Sarah Brightman version?
It's not as different as you might think. I would say it starts off maybe a little more sparse, whereas Cecil's production of it, I saw a couple live performances, is very much like a 3-piece band, whereas it starts out a little more sparse and then grows and swells to become more of an orchestral, like you would expect to support a classical opera singer type thing. But there is still kind of that guitar sound and kind of that laid back folk rock ballad sort of feel to it. So it like I said, it's not as different as you might think, but it's definitely a ballad.
There's a definite stage presence to this. I did want to kind of talk about that. This is a duet, and we haven't seen too many of those up to this point in Pokemon really at all. I mean, there was that weird promotional song for Ruby and Sapphire between Rachel Lillis and Veronica Taylor as Misty and Ash, respectively. That you might have...
And High Touch, too.
That'll come a bit later. High Touch will.
Yeah, that's true. That's not happened yet.
How do you feel about the way the male and female vocals kind of intersected and meld in this one?
I really love it. Like it's a duet, and it really also feels like a conversation. And from a song standpoint, it's very beautiful, and as it relates to the plot of the movie, I find I really appreciate it. I do think lyrically, it's, being that it wasn't written specifically for this movie, obviously, it's a little more on the vague side, but the emotions they're conveying are very much in line with the theme of the movie. So, yeah, I find it works really well together. And there are moments when they're singing in unison, and moments when they're singing like counterpoint, moments where each of them are soloing, and I find that the overall story that the song is telling fits very well with the feelings I have when this movie ends.
So, spoiler alert, I prefer the other song in this one, and I don't know if I'm on the wrong wavelength here or something, but I had, especially with the Sarah Brightman version, I don't feel like the two vocal parts really come together as well as I would like. I think I like the male part more in the versions I listen to. I think the Cecil version, I think the voices meld a little bit better, but somehow they just seem kind of off to me, and I kind of wanted to...
Oh, I see what you mean now. Yeah, the original Norwegian, they both kind of have that raspy rock voice, whereas here we have kind of a more sort of a male rock pop sort of vibe. He's not an opera singer, whereas she's got that very classically trained voice that, you know, resonates and it vibrates and it goes extremely high. You're right, and they are a bit disparate. For me, I like that disparity specifically. Like, if she had sung it with Placido Domingo or something, I don't think I would love this song as much, but I do see where you're coming from. Whereas that disparity might not work for everybody.
Yeah, like, I don't think any of these versions are terrible or anything. I mean, I don't find it grating or anything like that. But I do kind of feel like when I listen to either of the male parts against Sarah Brightman, if I had to keep one, I'd keep the male part. And I'd hate to say this. I mean, she's quite an accomplished singer, but I kind of think another female voice might have worked better, at least to my ears. And, you know, so...
I definitely think that's a valid opinion to have. For my part, I would keep it because to have her voice, which can kind of soar in the stratosphere, against a voice that kind of sounds more like what we would hear on the radio, like, it gives a very sort of ethereal vibe of, like, two separate worlds, which to me brings up those feelings of Darkrai living separately from the human world and relationships between humans and Pokemon. Like, it evokes a lot of those thoughts in me, which, spoiler alert for the movie, when we end, there's a lot of angst about the fact that they are separated from Darkrai, and in fact, a lot of the city thinks it's dead. It's not, but, like, there is definitely that part where it can't or won't live amongst the humans, and that's kind of a thread throughout the movie, is it making a connection with a human girl, you know, and not being able to relate to people and misunderstandings, and like many legendary Pokemon, feeling it has to live separately from them. So to me, having that dissonance, I guess, in their voices, which blends but not in maybe the way you might think, in the way you're talking about, works very well for me. Especially, again, with just her voice that just will pierce at the highest notes possible and ring like something that is not of this world. But I do think you have, like, you're not wrong to definitely not find that to be aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, it sort of feels, like I said, there is a certain separation is the best way I can describe it. And maybe that makes it work thematically with the movie, but not really as musically well as I would like. I'm having... Like I said, I knew when we got to this movie this would be a little bit of an odd discussion. And this is one of the movies that I thought about when I started the series that I really wanted to get to. So, but I just, even the Cecil version, they still don't quite interlock in the way I would expect. It's like they're in two very different places, but to a point... Let me think about this for just a second.
Keep listening for more from this interview